Okay, so let's dive in. We're looking today at what the source material calls the $1 billion question,
Right.
which is basically, how did Israel, I mean, you look at it, just 7.1 million people when the book was written, only 60 years old,
Uh-huh.
surrounded by conflict, like constantly,
Yeah.
and really lacking natural resources. How did they end up producing so many startups?
Yeah, especially high-tech ones. It's a huge number.
Exactly. Way more proportionally than you'd expect compared to, huge, stable places like Japan, China, India, Canada. It seems, well, unlikely on the surface.
It really does. It kind of flies in the face of what you normally think makes for economic success, doesn't it? And yeah, this deep dive, it's based on that book, Startup Nation, the story of Israel's economic miracle.
By Senior and Singer.
That's the one. And they
Okay.
really try to unpack this puzzle, not just looking at spreadsheets, but digging into the history, the culture,
Mhm.
the whole picture.
Right. So that's our mission here today. We want to pull out the main arguments from the book, the surprising stuff too.
Hmm.
Look at the history, the culture, the specific policies they say made this happen. It's kind of a journey, really, to understand how a place facing so many challenges just, well, became this global innovation hub.
And I think the interesting thing for you listening is what can you take away from this? What lessons are there about resilience, about ingenuity, maybe about how constraints can actually fuel progress?
Yeah, how adversity and culture and maybe some smart policy mixed together.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get right into that paradox, the why Israel question. We mentioned the unlikeliness. Tiny population, young country.
Constant conflict. The book mentions tension going way back, even to like 1891, before the state itself.
Right, and no oil, no major mineral wealth like some neighbors. Just not the typical starting point.
Not at all. Usually you think, okay, you need big domestic markets, stability, resources, maybe a long industrial history. Israel had, well, none of that.
Yet.
And yet the reality, as the book documents, is this explosion of innovation, especially by the early 2000s. Startups everywhere, highest density outside Silicon Valley.
All the big tech companies setting up R&D there. Intel, Microsoft, Google.
Yep, Cisco, IBM, Apple, the list goes on.
Yeah.
And serious venture capital flowing in. And Senor and Singer, coming from diplomacy and foreign policy backgrounds, they looked at it differently, I think. Less pure economics, more history and culture.
Which brings us to that historical context, scarcity, necessity. That seems absolutely fundamental to their argument.
Totally. The book really emphasizes the early struggles, the first pioneers trying to farm really difficult, arid land.
While dealing with conflict right from the start.
Exactly. So survival wasn't just an abstract goal, it was the only goal. Problem solving wasn't like a corporate initiative for Q3 results.
Right.
It was, how do we literally survive today? How do we make this desert bloom? How do we defend ourselves with almost nothing? It had to be ingrained.
And you see that driving actual innovation, like way before the internet age? Those early kibbutzim, the agricultural communes.
Trying to farm impossible land with hardly any water.
Which led directly to things like drip irrigation, right?
Yeah.
Netafim?
Yes. That's such a key example in the book. Netafim started on a kibbutz down in the Negev desert. It wasn't just a small improvement. It was a revolutionary way to deal with water scarcity.
Delivering water drop by drop right to the roots.
Exactly. Minimal waste. It was a direct answer to a massive national problem, not enough water. And they turned that solution into a global export. Changed agriculture in dry places everywhere. They solved a problem nobody else had really cracked effectively at that scale.
So the key takeaway here, the authors argue, isn't that Israel overcame adversity and then started innovating.
Right. It's more like they innovated because of the adversity.
Right.
And within it.
That pressure didn't go away. It became the constant background noise, the environment they operated in. And that built like a national muscle for improvisation for fast solutions.
Which is fascinating. So how does that constant pressure translate into, world-class tech? That's the next leap.
And this is where the book makes one of its most maybe controversial or at least distinctive points, the military.
Yes, the IDF.
Specifically, the experience within certain units. The book argues it's maybe the single most important engine for developing entrepreneurial skills and networks.
It's a system that's pretty unique globally, mandatory service for most Israelis, right after high school usually.
But the difference isn't just that everyone serves. It's the responsibility to give to really young people.
Yeah, the book hammers this point. You've got 19, 20, 21-year-olds, maybe 23 at the oldest, in positions of serious leadership. managing complex systems, making critical, high-stakes decisions, leading teams
Under immense pressure.
under immense pressure. Think about that anecdote of the 23-year-old battalion commander.
Right. Managing over 100 soldiers, complex ops, life and death stuff.
While their peers in, say, the US or Europe are maybe in their first year of uni or just getting an entry-level job.
It's worlds apart.
Yeah.
That early dose of intense leadership, resource management, real-time problem solving, dealing with uncertainty. It's like a pressure cooker for skills you might take decades to learn in a corporate setting.
It's a national leadership accelerator program, in a way. And then you have the elite units. Talpiot, Unit 8200.
These are the really selective ones.
Incredibly selective. Talpiot takes the absolute brightest kids and puts them through this insane multidisciplinary training, physics, math, computer science, engineering, plus officer training. The goal is to create leaders who can tackle the military's most complex tech challenges.
And 8200, that's the big intelligence unit, right? Signals intelligence,
Yeah.
cyber.
Exactly. Cutting-edge tech, massive data processing, cryptography. The book basically describes these units as, like, advanced R&D labs combined with intense leadership boot camps.
They're not just using tech, they're building new stuff under fire, almost literally sometimes.
Right. Fostering creativity, problem solving under extreme deadlines, thinking way outside the box because they have to.
And the connection to startups seems so direct when you frame it that way.
It really is. What do you need in a startup? Rapid problem solving, working in small, agile teams under pressure, managing projects with limited resources, leading peers, adapting constantly. That's exactly what these military roles demand.
There was that story from the 73 war, the Yom Kippur War.
Facing new Soviet missiles they hadn't seen.
Yeah, the officers on the ground, often young guys, they couldn't just wait for orders or analysis from HQ. They had to figure out how the missile worked right then, watching it in action, and improvise a countermeasure.
Talk about applied innovation under pressure with incredibly high stakes.
And remember that quote from Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO?
Oh, yeah, about the tank commander.
He said one of the best tech managers he ever met was this Israeli tank commander. He saw how managing that complex machine, the mechanics, electronics, logistics, communications, the crew, in unpredictable situations.
Directly translated to managing a complex tech team.
Exactly. That ability to lead, to manage complex systems under pressure. Schmidt saw the connection immediately.
And beyond just the skills, there's the culture within the military, which the book also highlights. It's described as having a relatively flat hierarchy, surprisingly flat compared to many other militaries.
And this culture of direct communication, even questioning superiors.
Right. Which connects to that famous Israeli trait, chutzpah.
Which can sometimes seem like rudeness to outsiders, maybe?
Maybe, but the book frames it more as boldness, audacity, a willingness to challenge assumptions, to cut through bureaucracy, to speak up if you think you have a better idea or see a flaw, regardless of rank.
It's results-oriented, less about politeness, more about getting the job done effectively.
And that's gold in a startup environment, isn't it? Challenging the status quo is the whole point.
Remember that joke in the book?
Yeah.
Someone bumps into an Israeli, says, "Excuse me," and the Israeli asks, "What do you mean, excuse me?"
Yeah. He kind of illustrates that directness. Cut the fluff, get to the point. It might be jarring sometimes, but it speeds things up. Good ideas can surface from anywhere.
Like that anecdote about the young major questioning General Villeneuve about the battlefield.
A junior officer felt okay challenging a top general based on what he was seeing firsthand. That shows a certain level of decentralized initiative being encouraged or at least tolerated.
And the final piece of the military puzzle, the networks.
Oh, huge. The bonds you form serving together, especially in those intense elite units facing risks together, they are incredibly strong. Lifelong trust.
The alumni network effect.
Absolutely. It's massive in the Israeli startup scene. People who serve together start companies together. They invest in each other's ventures. They become advisors, first hires.
The book specifically mentions the Unit 8200 network as being this, incredibly fertile ground for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, it's a ready-made ecosystem of trust and proven talent.
Yeah.
So you put it all together. The military is this unique incubator for skills, leadership, risk-taking, and networks.
But it's not just the military, the book argues. That same cultural DNA, that chutzpah, it permeates society more broadly.
Right, that boldness, that willingness to challenge, to improvise, it's not confined to the army barracks.
And maybe it connects to how failure is viewed.
I think so. The authors suggest that in a culture where you're constantly forced to be bold, to try things, to adapt on the fly, failure is maybe seen less as a final verdict and more as, feedback, data.
Fail fast, learn faster.
Exactly. You try something, it doesn't work. Okay, analyze why, pivot, try something else quickly. There isn't the same stigma attached to failure that you might find in some other cultures.
Okay, so culture is big. What else? Immigration seems like another massive piece of the puzzle. Aaliyah.
Huge. Especially that wave from the former Soviet Union in the 1990s, 1 million people, roughly.
And the key thing wasn't just the numbers, but the skills they brought.
Absolutely. The Soviet system, for all its faults, produced a lot of highly trained engineers, scientists, mathematicians, even musicians. The book notes often had rigorous analytical training. This huge influx of human capital arrived just as the tech world was taking off globally.
Perfect timing, in a way.
And think about the mindset of an immigrant. By definition, they're risk takers, right?
Yeah, you've uprooted your whole life.
You've left everything familiar, faced uncertainty. You have to adapt to a new language, a new culture, find work, build a new life from scratch. That process selects for resilience, problem solving, adaptability, an entrepreneurial spirit, really.
They're used to figuring things out in tough situations.
Exactly. And that anecdote about the Russian programmer and his mother.
Oh, yeah, where she couldn't understand why her highly qualified son wasn't getting some formal hierarchical job.
Right. She had to adjust her whole perception to the Israeli reality, where maybe titles matter less than what you can do, your skills, your initiative, or you might start somewhere unexpected but build something fast. That influx of FSU talent absolutely fueled the tech boom in the 90s.
And the government didn't just let it happen passively, did they? The book mentions specific programs.
Correct. Israel made a real effort to integrate these immigrants quickly. Things like providing housing, intensive Hebrew language schools, the Olpanim, and helping with job placement, trying to channel those skills into the growing tech sector and elsewhere.
It was a conscious effort to leverage that incoming talent.
And connecting back to that theme of adversity, resilience. It's woven through everything. Israel's faced constant challenges, not just security, but economic ones too, like the 1980s.
The hyperinflation crisis. That sounded terrifying. Inflation nearing 400%.
Can you imagine your money becoming worthless almost daily? It was crippling.
Yeah.
And the book talks about the shock program in 1985.
Which was really painful, right? Budget cuts, wage freezes.
Extremely painful. A stolen decade, some called it. But that crisis, horrible as it was, forced major structural economic reforms. It pushed Israel away from its earlier, more centralized, state-influenced economy.
Where big unions and state companies were dominant.
Exactly. Towards more privatization, more market orientation, fiscal discipline. So ironically, that painful crisis laid some essential groundwork for the market-driven growth that followed. It created space for the private sector, for capital markets to develop.
And that wasn't the last shock either. The dot-com bust in 2000 hit Israel, too.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like everywhere else with the big tech sector, companies folded, investment dried up for a bit.
But the argument is that the ecosystem bounced back relatively quickly, showed resilience.
That's what the source suggests. It was impacted for sure, but the underlying strengths, the talent, the culture, the networks, they were strong enough to weather it and start rebuilding maybe faster than some other places. These shocks become like stress tests for that national resilience.
Okay, so this naturally leads us into the role of government policy and, crucially, money. How did the system get funded? You mentioned that shift towards a market economy.
Right, a gradual process starting maybe in the 60s, but really accelerating through the 80s and 90s. Less dominance by the kibbutzim and the big labor federation, more space for private enterprise.
But there was one specific government program in the early 90s that the book flags as incredibly important for the VC scene.
Yesma, yes. This seems to have been absolutely pivotal. Launched in 93.
How did it work? What made it so effective?
Well, the problem back then was that Israel had promising tech ideas, but not much local venture capital expertise. And foreign VCs were hesitant, small market, perceived risk.
Geopolitics.
Geopolitics, exactly. So the government stepped in with Yesma, which means initiative in Hebrew. They basically offered a deal to foreign VCs.
What kind of deal?
They set up 10 new VC funds, putting in $100 million of government money. But the genius part was offering matching funds and really attractive tax incentives to experienced foreign VC firms if they'd partner with Israelis and invest in Israeli startups.
So they were essentially subsidizing the risk for the foreigners.
Partly that, but also, crucially, buying their expertise. They structured it so these foreign VCs would bring their knowledge of how to evaluate startups, build global companies, manage portfolios, things the local scene was still learning. The government said, come here, partner with us, invest your money alongside ours, and we'll make it worth your while financially and share the risk.
Smart. So it wasn't just a handout.
Not at all. It was strategic co-investment. And the impact, according to the book, was massive. It broke the logjam. Major foreign VCs came in who might otherwise have stayed away.
And that kickstarted a local VC industry.
Exactly. That initial $100 million from Yozma is credited with catalyzing hundreds of millions, eventually billions, in private investment, both foreign and local. It essentially built the foundations of the Israeli venture capital market that fueled the startup boom through the 90s and beyond.
Wow, one program having that much leverage.
Seems like it. And it wasn't just VC money going into startups. There was another layer. The big multinationals setting up R&D centers.
Right, we mentioned Intel, Microsoft, Cisco.
And the point the book makes is these weren't just minor sales offices. These were core R&D operations. Often they'd acquire a successful Israeli startup and build the R&D center around that team and technology.
That's a huge vote of confidence, isn't it? Global giants deciding they need Israeli talent for their core product development.
Absolutely. It signals that the innovation happening there isn't just peripheral, it's world-class and essential. The Intel example in Haifa is key.
Developing critical parts of their processors.
Yeah, the book mentions the Centrino mobile chip platform, specifically having core technology developed there. It shows Israel contributing fundamental IP to the global tech infrastructure.
And then, talk about validation. Warren Buffett.
The Oracle of Omaha weighs in.
His investment philosophy is famously conservative, right? Stick to U.S. companies, you understand.
Pretty much. Very cautious about overseas investments, especially in complex regions.
So his decision in 2006 to buy Iskar.
For $4.5 billion, initially for 80%. And Iskar wasn't even a software company. It was high-tech manufacturing precision tools based up north.
Which makes it even more interesting.
It does. And Buffett later bought the rest. The book highlights his comments afterwards, saying things like, Israel was arguably the best place outside the U.S. for foreign investment.
Coming from Buffett, that carries immense weight globally.
Huge signal. It wasn't just about Iskar. It was a stamp of approval on the maturity, the innovation, the stability, frankly, of the Israeli economy as a place to do serious business. It reinforced that Israel Inside idea went beyond just code. It was about deep technological capability across sectors.
Okay, so we have this unique mix. The military incubator, the culture, the immigrant influx, the strategic government funding, the global validation. How did this all translate into actual products and impact? What came out of this ecosystem?
Well, the book gives some great examples. Checkpoint Software is a classic early one, founded in '93.
The firewall guys.
Exactly. They basically invented the commercial firewall, foundational technology for internet security that, we all still rely on constantly. Their success was huge early validation.
Absolutely critical for e-commerce, secure communications, everything.
Then there's Mobileye, more recent. Vision systems for cars.
Driver assistance, moving towards autonomous driving.
Right. Using cameras and sophisticated algorithms to understand the car's surroundings. Their tech is in millions of cars from major manufacturers worldwide. Hugely impactful for safety. And then Intel bought them, which again shows that integration.
And Netafim, the drip irrigation. Still important to remember, it's not all software.
Definitely. Fundamental tech solving real-world resource problems. It shows the breadth of the innovation.
And the sheer scale of it all. The book gives numbers, right?
Yeah, the metrics are striking. Consistently, Israel has had one of the highest numbers of companies listed on the NASDAQ exchange outside North America, often more than entire continents.
More than huge countries like India or China, at least at the time the book was focused on.
Right. It's that concentration, that density of tech companies and startups relative to its tiny size that's so remarkable. Plus, the sheer volume of foreign investment coming in and the number of Israeli companies being acquired by global players. It all points to a system generating real value.
Which brings us back to that Israel Inside concept.
It's a core idea in the book. Because Israeli innovation often involves these fundamental technologies or components, it gets embedded in products you use every day, but you don't necessarily see a Made in Israel sticker.
So it could be in the security protecting your online banking.
Or in the chip technology in your phone or computer.
Or advanced medical devices.
Agricultural tech, helping grow food. It's often this invisible but critical layer woven into the global tech fabric.
And other countries have noticed this, haven't they? Trying to figure out the secret sauce.
Yeah, the book mentions places like India and China looking at Israel, trying to learn lessons, maybe emulate parts of the model.
But can it be replicated?
Well, the authors seem pretty clear that the exact mix of factors in Israel, the specific history, the unique military role, the particular cultural traits, the specific immigration waves, the Yozma timing, that precise combination, is probably impossible to replicate wholesale.
It's too specific to its own context.
Right. But that doesn't mean there aren't lessons to learn about how necessity can drive innovation, maybe how to cultivate risk-taking, how a government can play a smart catalytic role without picking winners, how to leverage talent networks. There are definitely insights applicable elsewhere.
Now, it's important we don't just paint a perfect picture. The book itself acknowledges risks and vulnerabilities, right? This miracle isn't necessarily guaranteed to last forever without challenges,
Absolutely, and that's crucial. One big one is the reliance on exports.
because the home market is just too small.
Exactly. So Israeli companies have to be global from day one. But that means when the US or European economies sneeze, Israel catches a cold. Over half the GDP comes from exports, mainly to those markets. So global downturns hit hard.
Makes sense? Vulnerable to external shocks.
And then there's the obvious one, the geopolitical risk, the ongoing conflicts and regional tensions.
The book mentions Iran, the 2006 Lebanon War.
Right, and the point isn't about taking sides, but acknowledging that instability, whatever its cause, creates uncertainty. It can deter investors, disrupt business, even if temporarily. It's a constant background risk factor.
And that small domestic market is a double-edged sword. Forces global thinking, but offers no cushion.
True. Also, the book touches on the concentration in the tech sector. Is the economy too reliant on tech? What happens if that sector faces a prolonged global slump? Does growth need to be broader?
That's a fair question for any specialized economy, I suppose.
And maybe one of the biggest long-term challenges mentioned is utilizing all the human capital,
Hmm.
meaning that the benefits and participation in the startup nation phenomenon haven't always been evenly distributed across Israeli society. The book notes the challenge of fully integrating the ultra-Orthodox Haredi community and the Arab Israeli population into the high-tech workforce and innovation ecosystem. Tapping into the potential of those communities is seen as critical for the future.
So maximizing the potential of the whole population, not just certain segments.
Exactly. And we saw that resilience tested, as we mentioned, with the dot-com crash, the 2008 financial crisis.
They hit Israel, slowed things down.
They did. VC funding dipped, exports fell, but the ecosystem weathered it, recovered.
Yeah.
It shows a certain robustness, but also highlights that these vulnerabilities are real and ongoing. It requires constant adaptation.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. We've gone through this deep dive into Startup Nation, looking at how this, well, unlikely economic story unfolded.
Yeah, summarizing the key drivers the book lays out, you've got the military experience acting as this unique talent and leadership forge.
Creating risk takers and networks.
Right. Then the culture, that chutzpah, the directness, resilience, comfort with failure.
The massive impact of skilled immigration, especially from the FSU.
Injecting talent and an entrepreneurial drive, and then smart government policy like Yozma, not controlling things, but strategically catalyzing private investment, especially foreign capital and expertise.
It seems like the core insight is that it wasn't despite the challenges, but maybe because of them, combined with these other factors, that Israel developed this capacity.
That's the argument, yeah. Necessity met culture, met policy, all turbocharged by specific demographic shifts. It forced improvisation, building from scratch, innovating under constant pressure.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, to chew on is this. Is it possible that the very things we usually see as obstacles, scarcity, conflict, maybe even the friction from immigration, could, under certain specific circumstances and with the right responses, actually become drivers of innovation and resilience?
It's a provocative idea, isn't it, that adversity itself might be a necessary ingredient sometimes.
So how can other places, facing their own challenges, learn from this? Maybe not by copying Israel directly, because the context is unique, but by thinking about how to cultivate resilience, encourage that bold thinking, build those strong networks, leverage all their diverse talent. What lessons from these, as the book calls them, high-tech farmers, resonate most in your world, whether you're running a business, a team, or just navigating challenges?
A lot to think about there, a really complex but definitely fascinating story.